For years, Mark had believed he was living a life most people only dreamed of. His marriage to Sophie felt like a story written in sunlight, bright, warm, and reassuring. They had built a world together brick by brick. Morning coffee shared in quiet comfort, movie nights filled with laughter, lazy Sundays spent in the soft glow of love. To anyone looking from the outside, they were the perfect couple, the kind that made others believe in forever. Sophie had always been the center of Mark's world, beautiful, graceful, and full of life. She had a smile that could light up his darkest days, and a way of making ordinary moments feel magical. Mark often told himself that love like theirs could survive anything. He trusted her completely, with the kind of blind faith that only comes from a heart untouched by betrayal. But perfection, he would learn, is often just a fragile mask hiding the truth. It began with little things, moments so small they almost went unnoticed. A sudden change in her perfume, the way her laughter sounded different, lighter, as if shared with someone else. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now always tucked away, guarded like a secret. When he asked about the late nights at work, she smiled softly and said, "You know how demanding my job is, Mark. Don't worry so much." And he didn't, at least not at first. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that the woman he had loved for nearly 7 years would never lie to him. But deep down, something inside him began to shift. The warmth in their home felt colder. Their conversations grew shorter, her eyes drifting away whenever he tried to meet them. It wasn't anger he felt, not yet, but quiet unease, like a shadow slowly creeping over everything they had built together. Still, Mark clung to hope. He cooked her favorite meals, left little notes on her pillow, tried to remind her the love that had once burned so brightly between them. But love, he realized, can't survive on memories alone. He didn't know it then, but the world he thought was perfect was about to shatter, and the truth hiding behind Sophie's smile would change him forever. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of day that slips quietly between the pages of routine. Mark came home early from work, hoping to surprise Sophie with dinner. The house was calm, too calm, as if holding its breath. Her handbag lay on the sofa, her phone peeking out just enough of the screen to light up. A message flashed before it faded. 3 simple words that froze him in place. "I miss you already." His pulse quickened. For a moment, he convinced himself it was nothing. Maybe a friend, maybe a harmless joke. But the uneasy weight in his chest refused to settle. When Sophie walked in moments later, humming softly, he asked, his voice steady but his heart trembling, "Who messaged you?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she smiled. "Oh, just someone from work. We were joking about a project. Don't be paranoid, Mark." Her tone was light, but her hands moved too quickly to lock her phone and tuck it away. That night, he lay awake beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Each inhale sounded like a lie he didn't want to believe. He turned his gaze toward the ceiling, haunted by thoughts he couldn't silence. The woman who once told him everything now guarded her words like fragile glass. In the days that followed, small cracks began to show. She came home late again, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. Her laughter over the phone was softer, more intimate, the kind she used to share only with him. When he asked what was wrong, she brushed his concern aside with a tired smile and said she was just exhausted. But deep within him, something shifted, not anger, but an ache of realization, the certainty that love, once so sure, had begun to drift away. Mark tried to shake off the feeling, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. And from that night on, every unanswered text, every forced smile, every unexplained silence watered it, until it began to grow roots deep inside his heart. Doubt is a quiet poison. It doesn't kill love all at once. It drains it slowly, drop by drop. By the time Mark could no longer ignore the signs, he was living in the shadow of his own home. The warmth that once filled their rooms had turned to uneasy silence. Sophie smiled less, talked less, and spent more and more time at work. He tried to believe her. Truly he did. But every instinct inside him screamed that something was terribly wrong. One night, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Mark decided to know the truth, whatever it cost him. He started simply. He checked her social media, though she had grown cautious. deleting photos and hiding her activity. He noticed new names commenting beneath her posts, names he didn't recognize. Then one evening, when Sophie left her laptop open before rushing out, his trembling hands betrayed his heart. He clicked on her messages, and there it was, Ethan. The name appeared again and again, wrapped in words that cut deeper than any blade. I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. I wish I could wake up next to you instead. The air left his lungs. For a moment, the room spun, and all he could hear was the thunder of his heartbeat. He wanted to scream, to break something, to run, but instead he sat there, staring at the words, unable to look away. Every message was a piece of the truth he had refused to see. When Sophie came home that night, she found him sitting quietly on the couch. She smiled, kissed his cheek, and went to change, unaware that her lies had already been laid bare. The next day, Mark followed her. He parked his car a few streets away from her office, waiting in silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he saw her emerge, not alone, but with him, Ethan. Their laughter was soft, intimate, too familiar. And when she leaned in to kiss him, Mark's heart finally shattered. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Rage was not what he felt. Only a deep, hollow grief. But beneath that grief, something began to stir. A resolve. That night, he looked at their wedding photo on the mantelpiece. 2 smiling faces, frozen in a lie. And for the first time, he whispered to himself, she doesn't get to break me. The truth had destroyed the illusion. But in its ashes, Mark began to plan his calm, quiet revenge, not to hurt her, but to set himself free. The days that followed were eerily calm. Mark no longer searched for explanations. He already had them, written in her own words. But instead of anger, he chose silence. It was not the silence of weakness, but of a man gathering his strength. He moved through their home like a ghost, watching, waiting, and planning. Sophie, sensing the change, began to tread carefully. She noticed the way he looked at her, not with love, not with hate, but with a kind of distant understanding that unsettled her. She asked once, "Is everything okay?" Mark smiled, the corners of his mouth barely lifting. "Everything's fine," he said softly. "Just thinking." He began to prepare quietly. Late at night, when Sophie was asleep or away, he organized their finances, separated his accounts, and removed his name from things that tied them together. He consulted a lawyer, discreetly. The truth had already broken him once. Now he would rebuild himself, with control, not chaos. One evening, Sophie came home later than usual. She looked exhausted but strangely radiant, her perfume lingering like a confession. Mark sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice. When she said she had a team meeting, he nodded, his tone calm and unbothered. "I hope it went well," he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. Inside, his heart ached. Each lie from her lips felt like a small death, but he refused to show it. He knew confrontation now would only end in denial, tears, or excuses. No! He wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, not through shouting, but through realization. A week later, he invited her to dinner for their upcoming anniversary. Sophie looked surprised, even relieved. "You remembered?" she asked, smiling nervously. "Of course," he said, his voice gentle, his eyes unreadable. "I thought we could celebrate at home this year. Something simple. Just us." That night, after she fell asleep, Mark walked to the quiet house, their photos on the walls, their memories framed in glass. Each image told a lie he once believed. He stood before one of them, their wedding photo, and whispered, "Tomorrow, you'll finally see what honesty looks like." He wasn't planning to shout, accuse, or beg. He was planning to end the war she had started with quiet precision. The storm was coming, and this time it would not come from anger, but from truth. The night of their anniversary arrived with an unsettling stillness. Rain whispered softly against the windows, and the scent of candles filled the dining room. Mark had prepared everything himself. Her favorite wine, her favorite meal, the table set with quiet elegance. To anyone else, it might have looked like an act of love, but for Mark, it was a ceremony of truth. When Sophie came home, she looked almost startled by the scene. You did all this? She asked, setting her purse down, her voice laced with guilt and confusion. He smiled faintly. Of course. 7 years deserves something special, doesn't it? They sat across from each other, the candlelight flickering between them like a fragile heartbeat. Sophie tried to fill the silence with small talk, her work, her friends' meaningless chatter. But Mark listened quietly, his gaze steady and unreadable. When the plates were cleared, he leaned back his chair and spoke softly. Do you remember when we promised we'd never keep secrets from each other? Sophie froze. Her smile faltered. Of course, she said quickly, eyes darting away. Mark reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. The screen lit up, and with a single tap, the room filled with the sound of laughter, her laughter, followed by a man's voice, soft and intimate. He let the video play for only a few seconds before stopping it. Sophie's face turned pale. Mark, I can explain. He raised a hand gently. You don't have to. I already know. Tears welled in her eyes. It was a mistake, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen. I love you, Mark's voice remained calm, almost heartbreakingly so. Love doesn't lie, Sophie. Love doesn't sneak away into the dark and come back smelling like someone else. She broke down, her shoulders shaking, pleading for understanding. But he didn't shout. He didn't throw things or curse her name. He simply stood, his expression unreadable, and said, You took what we built and handed it to someone who didn't earn it. I just want you to know that I saw everything, and now I see you. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her sobs and the rain outside. Then Mark turned away, his voice quiet but final. Dinner's over, Sophie. So is this? As he walked down the hall, leaving her alone in the glow of the dying candles, she realized the cruelest part of it all. He hadn't screamed, hadn't insulted her. He had forgiven her with silence, and that silence hurt more than any words ever could. The house felt impossibly quiet after that night. The candles had long burned out, but their faint scent still lingered, a reminder of promises now turned to ashes. Mark barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of Sophie crying in the next room. Once, that sound would have broken him. Now, it only confirmed what he already knew. Some wounds could not be healed by tears. By morning, the sunlight crept gently through the blinds, but it carried no warmth. Mark rose, showered, and brewed his coffee as if it were any other day. When Sophie came into the kitchen, her eyes swollen and voice trembling, he looked at her, not with hatred, but with a deep, exhausted sadness. Mark, please, she began softly. I made a mistake. I was confused, lonely. I didn't know how to fix what we were losing. He set his mug down slowly. And you thought another man could fix it for you? He asked, his tone calm but cutting. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. I still love you. Mark sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry all the weight of the past 7 years. You say you love me, he said quietly. But love isn't something that just happens when it's easy. It's what you choose when things get hard. You didn't choose me, Sophie. You chose the escape. Her lips trembled. I can change. Please, Mark, we can fix this. For a moment, he looked at her, the woman who had once been his entire world, and a flicker of old affection stirred. But it wasn't enough. He had spent weeks replaying every lie, every half-truth. Every night she came home with someone else's scent on her skin. There was no rebuilding what she had burned. I'm not angry anymore, he said at last, his voice steady. I don't want revenge, and I don't want to hurt you, but I can't live in a lie. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The papers are ready. Her face drained of color. You're leaving me? Mark met her gaze, calm, unwavering. No, Sophie, you left me a long time ago. I'm just catching up. He slid the envelope across the table, stood up, and walked toward the door. She called his name, her voice breaking, but he didn't turn around. He paused only once, his hand on the doorframe, and said softly, You wanted freedom. Now you have it. Then he left, not with rage, but with peace. Behind him, Sophie collapsed into tears, realizing too late that the man she thought would always forgive her had finally chosen himself. The days that followed were strangely quiet. The house that once echoed with laughter and shared warmth now stood hollow, just walls and memories. Mark packed his things slowly, methodically, not out of anger but out of acceptance. Every photo he took down felt like removing a piece of a dream that no longer belonged to him. When the door closed behind him for the last time, there were no tears, only a deep, solemn calm. He drove away with nothing but a few boxes and the soft ache of what might have been. The first weeks alone were hard. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Every morning, he still reached across the bed out of habit, only to find emptiness. But with each passing day, the weight began to lift. The air felt cleaner, his thoughts clearer. He realized he had spent so long trying to save a love that didn't want saving that he had forgotten what it felt like to live for himself. Sophie called a few times. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she begged, and sometimes she just wanted to talk. But Mark had learned that closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from silence. So he listened quietly, offered no anger, and simply said, "I hope you find peace." And then he hung up. Months passed, and the pain began to soften into something almost gentle, a memory instead of a wound. Mark started running again, painting again, rediscovering the little joys he had neglected. He met new people, not searching for love, but for peace, and in that peace, he found himself again. One crisp autumn afternoon, he stopped by a small cafe near the river, the same one he had seen Sophie in that night with Ethan. He sat by the window, watching the water move, calm and endless. For the first time, he felt nothing but gratitude, not for betrayal, but for the strength it had forced him to find. Somewhere, he knew, Sophie was living her own version of the aftermath, perhaps full of regret, perhaps still chasing forgiveness that would never come. But that was no longer his burden to carry. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark smiled faintly. The man who had once been broken by love had learned its hardest lesson. Sometimes, losing someone isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be.